So we're reading Tzaria and Metzora together. The Metzora deals, of course, almost exclusively with the processes related to this Saras disease, which, as we said, was not leprosy. So it says as follows: the Daber Bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel. And by the way, when it says God spoke to Moshe, Lamor saying means to say, Lamor to say. Saying is incorrect. It should be Hashem spoke to Moshe, Lamor to say the following to Jewish people. Daber Bnei Israel, Lamor saying, Isha woman, Tzaria who will conceive, the Yolda Zachar, and give birth to a male child, the Ta'ama Shivat Yamim, and so she will be impure. And again, impure is a bad word. Kimei nidas devos hatitma, as long as the impurity of her menses, and shall be unclean. And on the 8th day, imo b'sar lasso, the boy is given a bris. The reason we mention this again is because all the mitzvot mentioned before Sinai are reiterated after Sinai. Now, the idea that, now what is this idea? So we know that for the monthly cycle and when a woman gives birth, there is tuma. Now tuma is we'll talk more about it another day. Is translated impurity, but really means a state of opacity, where spirituality with its soul is not as present as it is. That's why we get up in the morning, because the soul was absent from us when we slept. The soul had left the body somewhat. So too, when a woman gives birth or has the potential to give birth, because every month there is the potential for birth, conceptually, and when that goes away, or when you give birth to a child that used to be in the person and now it's no longer within, so there is now less life force in the person than there was before. That dissonance, that reduction in, shall we say, the presence of vitality, is what we call tuma. It is relatively speaking an absence of divine energy that previously had been there. This is the basic idea of tuma in the whole Torah. Why, if you touch a dead cow, are you tameh for a day? Because the cow used to be alive and now it's dead. There is an absence of the divine vitalizing force. And when we come into touch with death, we are coming into the touch of the opposite of divinity, the absence of divinity. And this is the idea of tuma. Tuma is not evil. It's not wrong to be tameh, but you're not allowed to enter the temple, eat from a sacrifice when one is tameh. Why? Because to enter the temple, one has to be in a state of the greatest possible spiritual energy, the greatest connection to God. When one goes through, whether one comes into contact with human death or animal death, or the loss of potential life that takes place when a woman gives birth, or goes through the cycle where an ovulation ends without birth. In all these cases, there's an absence of divine presence. And that absence is a sense of distance and darkness. That's the opposite of the state one needs to enter the holiest places. And that's why each of these episodes, including coming into contact with the dead animal, and the internal episodes of birth and so on, the resolution is the mikveh, because the Torah describes it as washing with water, but it really means immersion in a mikveh, because a mikveh, all life depends on water, and that's true physically because it's true spiritually. And the mitzvah of mikveh contains within its water the divine life energy that is the restoration, the rebirth from death. And that's the reason why, let's say you touch the dead animal, you can't enter the temple till you immerse in the mikveh and the sun sets. And this relates to all of these ideas. Nowadays, the only one that remains truly relevant is that related to Taharat HaMishpacha, the family purity, with regards to the regular use of the mikveh in the context of a marriage. But in the times of the temple, you'll see in the excavations in Jerusalem, there's mikvahs all over the place. Why? Because there are lots of ways to become tameh. You touch a dead rat, you're tameh, and you need to restore one's connection to life by immersion in the mikveh, which again has a spiritual power. But goes on to say, for 33 days, it's the purified blood. For 33 days after the birth of a boy, she can't enter the temple, but she and her husband are permissible to each other, and until it's completed. And if it's a girl she gives birth to, since girls themselves will give birth and have to go through this process, it's double in both cases, and for a total of 80 days, and 40 days for boy. And at the end, she brings a burnt offering as thanks to Hashem for the baby, and ben Yonah tor lachatos, and a pigeon or a dove for these are the two animals we learned already can be used for a bird, for a sin offering, to the 10th of them. Why does she have to bring a chatat, a sin offering? So the answer that the Medrash gives is that childbirth is a difficult and challenging thing, and there's likely a moment where very often at some point in one's consciousness, a woman will make a vow, I'm not going to do this again. So since ultimately once she enjoys the baby, she says, I'll do it again. So because she made a vow that inevitably will break, so says the Midrash, she brings a sin offering. And apparently, having studied this with many people, much of the distaff side agrees with me that there's a moment where you don't want to do this again. So, generally speaking, is a very interesting Gemara. The Gemara asks, you have all these rabbis, talking about things that relate to childbirth and so on. What do they know? So the Gemara gives a very simple answer. They ask their wives. Okay, but be that as it may, the deeper idea over here is that a sacrifice is coming close to God, and just like, let's say, when you convert to Judaism, you immerse in the mikveh, and you also bring a sacrifice. So too here, when you have a new child and the new baby enters the Jewish people, so you bring a sacrifice. The idea of you come to the temple and you bring an offering, which we've talked in the past, is this idea of coming close to God and acknowledging the addition to the Jewish people, to the holiness of the Jewish people that is represented in the temple of a new member of the Jewish people. Hence this particular korban. And then he'll bring it before Hashem for Tarim and Kordameh, that the Zos Torah Yoledet L'Zachar Nekeva. This is the law for giving birth, whether male or female. And what happens if you can't afford a lamb? Because now it's very interesting. The Torah is practical. In other words, rather than have someone submit to charity, we say that, look, if you can't afford a sheep for an olah, so then you bring just 2 birds. And birds were very cheap. If you look in ancient excavations, you'll find colibariums, which is Latin for dovecotes, everywhere. Because basically, if you dig holes in the side of a wall or build a structure with lots of little holes in it and you put food in it, doves and pigeons will come live there. Doves and pigeons are very resilient. You'll see, all the urban centers are overrun with pigeons and the like. As a matter of fact, the reason why all the tall skyscrapers in New York now have hawks' nests in them is because there's so many pigeons around. It's like free lunch. So which is why you'll see hawks' nests, the Chrysler Building, Empire State Building, Bank America Building, all the buildings in New York, tall buildings, and I assume in Chicago, etc., have hawks' nests. But at any rate, pigeons grow easily, and if you provide them food and you hatch baby pigeon eggs there, they'll keep coming back. And so pigeons are relatively inexpensive. They were an inexpensive source of high quality protein. Before refrigeration, So one fully grown pigeon is about a portion for one person. So you just get as many pigeons as you need. You don't have to worry about leftover food. So these were also used as kosher birds. These are the only kosher birds used for sacrifices. So if a woman can't afford a little sheep, the family can't afford a sheep. So then she brings just 2 birds, which is a relatively inexpensive business. Because since everyone had babies,
I had no idea.
everyone is necessarily wealthy, we see the Torah adjusted it. And this is a general point that one should make, that one of the things you learn from these stories is that the Torah is built in such a way that under normal circumstances we are not given the opportunity to say, oh, it's too hard, I can't do it, because under normal circumstances and the normal distribution of incomes and health and so on, the Torah is eminently doable for everyone in all times and all places. So with other sacrifices, let's say certain sacrifices are only a sheep or something like that. So then, maybe you have to rely on charity. But the Torah didn't want something as common as having a baby should cause someone to rely on charity. So we make the sacrifice someone that absolutely everyone can afford. And, by the way, and from this, we also learn an important principle that God has compassion on the Jewish people's possessions, which means that there's a range, very often in many laws, there's a range of halachic possibilities. So there are indications for leniency. One of the indications for leniency is hefsed meruba, is a significant loss. A loss that is significant to that particular person, because people have different tolerance for loss. And that's a reason to be lenient. And the Talmud derives this from here and from other places, that God is sympathetic to people's financial situation, and that is in its sense part of the Torah itself, which is why in many cases that's a cause for leniency. And we learn it out from this and other cases. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. And tomorrow, I believe we're going to move on to stories about the tzarat, about the skin disease that is not leprosy, that comes from mysterious reasons.
Rabbi?
Yes?
I had no idea that the pigeon was a kosher animal. I believe
yes,
it was.
Pigeons, there are many kosher birds, but the pigeons and the doves are the 2 kosher birds that are allowed to be used for a sacrifice in the temple.
Yeah,
yes. However, you do have to shech them properly. So, once you catch one, you have to shech it properly. Okay.
Rabbi, how about one
yes.
more tiny question? Since the Kohanim touched the dead animals, do they then have to?
Very good point. So we're going to learn later in the book of Vayikra, we actually discussed it last week, that a dead animal that is properly slaughtered does not confer impurity. Only if it dies on its own, it's an avela, does it confer impurity. Tuma is the better word. But if you slaughtered it properly, it does not confirm tuma, because since once it's slaughtered properly, it's available for human consumption. The animal is not dead. It's merely transformed to the ability of assimilation into the human being. Because it's having a positive purpose and it's being elevated to be consumed by a human being, so it's not tameh, because it's not just dead. It's useful. I'll tell you a funny story about that tomorrow, if you remind me. There's a funny Hasidic story about this concept. Okay, have a very wonderful day, everyone. Women have equal procedure for offerings. To bring an offering, men and women are equal. The Kohanim, who actually serve in the Beit HaMikdash, are men, for the same reason that we divide the labor in other areas too. But women can enter the temple and bring offerings. As a matter of fact, even some of the significant objects in the temple were donated by women. So yeah, women have equal opportunity in bringing offerings, and prophecy, to be a prophet, is also an equal opportunity employer. Women and men can equally be prophets.
Thanks, Rabbi.
which, by the way, is the most powerful position in Judaism, because everyone, even the Sanhedrin or the king, has to listen to a prophet, as we shall discuss in the future. Okay, so with that, wish everyone a great day, and
too,
see
Rabbi.
you all tomorrow, God willing, for more Parsha. All the
Thank
best.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.